Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, politics, government, education, business, anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above. I am joined once again by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder and co-reporter and co-everything of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing okay. Just got finished covering the University of Tennessee's Board of Trustees winter meetings. So.
Is that board with a B-O-A-R-D or a B-O-R-E-D?
There were times during the 2 days of meetings that it was B-O-R-E-D, but...
It's dangerous for us to spell live here.
I know.
Operating without a net, no spell check, no editors.
Operating without a keyboard.
Without a keyboard, that's right. Yeah, I got to think about where your fingers go. Which letter is it? All right, well, we do have some things to talk about this week apart from the University of Tennessee, although we will be talking about them. We have an interview coming up with Buddy Burkhardt, who is the newly named chair of the Knox County Republican Party, talking to him about his plans and goals, aspirations. A little bit of an update on our legislature, talking about those bills about drag shows and gender-affirming care that we have talked about here before. The pedestrian bridge. Speaking of the University of Tennessee, there was some action on the proposed pedestrian bridge from two directions, both the university and city council, considering some items to do with that. Town of Farragut, which we don't talk about a whole lot here, just a brief mention of a project they are working on. And to start us all off, let's talk a little bit about Knoxville Police Department. First of all, and this actually happened about a week ago,
right.
But Chief Paul Noel named a new deputy chief who is an unusual person, and it's an unusual position in a lot of ways. What's going on there, Scott?
Yeah, the position is Deputy Chief of Professional Standards, and it is a non-sworn officer position. It is an executive level position, right below chief level, but it's a position that was created to, as the name implies, oversee the professional standards of the police department, the culture of the police department, if you will. And Noel named a lawyer here in town who teaches at UT some. She's a former prosecutor. Her name is Brooklyn Sawyers Belk. And
I have to say, Brooklyn Belk is a pretty strong name. I mean, it's just one of those ones that kind of pops.
Yeah, and the things they announced that she would be appointed to the position, was it 2 Fridays ago? And she wasn't available to answer questions, so I didn't get a chance to ask her why she was named Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
If what the deal is. Next time I talk to her, though, that's going to be the first question out of my mouth.
That's a good name.
But anyway, she is a former prosecutor. She's very familiar with law. In fact, has done law enforcement training, and so she's very familiar with law enforcement agencies. She's also worked in the private sector. She is has written and has taught a lot about constitutional law, especially with regarding racial bias in the court system. So
and she is African American herself.
She is African American herself, and KPD has had some issues with regarding race. There are only a handful of African American officers. Every one of them has said that they've encountered discrimination at KPD, and one of the things that Noel has made a priority is recruiting a more diverse police force. So, although one of the things is, I asked Noel about this, if that was not consideration necessarily in hiring her, but if he thought that would help the community's perception of KPD and help in recruiting African American officers. And he said, first of all, the community is going to think what the community is going to think. That's not why I hired her. I hired her because she's highly qualified. And as far as the recruiting of black officers, he said that her role in helping to reshape the hiring process at KPD, which was already underway, would go a lot further, to help with recruiting a more diverse force than the mere fact that she's African American in a high profile position.
Mm-hmm. So, and the goal here is to kind of help reshape the culture of that, because KPD already has internal affairs. So when there's an individual officer accused of some particular individual act, they already have a system for investigating that. But her mandate, it sounds like, is going to be much broader than any individual officer doing something wrong.
Right. Well, one of the things is internal affairs is going to report to her. Mm-hmm. She's in charge of all types of investigations into officer activity. She is going to also be the liaison to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, which they investigate officer-involved shootings or deaths in police custody, which we can talk about in a minute too. Mm-hmm. And then and also with the Police Advisory and Review Committee. So she's doing that. She's also going to be in charge of developing policies and procedures that they will all follow. One of the things that Noel wants to do is to put together an actual policy manual. They don't have one. They have a collection of general orders that is the kind of the de facto policy manual, but she'll be in charge of developing it. So she's got a pretty broad mandate, and she will be, she'll be. And you're right. She is the one person in charge of all that. Now, Noel is also quick to say we're all responsible for good police behavior, but he said, he points out that this is her job 24/7.
Right. She'll be kind of like the guiding light on that. Maybe.
Right, and she has a challenge right out of the gate.
Right. So this may be one of the types of incidents that she'll be looking at, because this week KPD released, first of all, the results of an investigation, which I guess was actually done by the District Attorney General's office, into the death of a woman who died in the back of a police cruiser recently, a 60-year-old woman. 60, right?
60 years old. Her name was Lisa Edwards.
And they found, the District Attorney's Office found no violations here, that they said nothing the officers did contributed to her death. But then KPD also released the complete video, about an hour and a half or so of video around this incident. And it is an incident that raises a lot of questions, because the deal was she had been discharged from a local hospital and had refused to leave. Basically, she was still seeking. She had been discharged from one hospital, Blunt Memorial.
Yeah, she'd been to Blunt Memorial. Here, a little further background. She flew in the day before all this happened from Rhode Island, and where she'd been in a nursing home. and she flew in. She went to Blunt Memorial.
And she already had some disability. She was in a wheelchair.
She had all kinds of health problems, COPD. According to the DA's office, she had alcohol issues. She was overweight. I don't know, maybe other problems. I don't know the whole extent of her health history, but she had problems. At Blunt Memorial, they diagnosed her with constipation and discharged her. And so she came to Fort Sanders in Knoxville.
Clearly still in distress.
She was and they threw her out. And that's when the police got called.
I mean, basically, they examined her and said there wasn't any reason to admit her, and then they discharged her, and she wouldn't leave, right? And was maybe creating a little disturbance outside. So, and you can see this on the video because the video starts when the police arrive. And, there's a lot of conversation between the officers and the medical personnel, and then there's kind of some struggle to get her into a police vehicle.
A very long struggle. They called in the transportation van because they were going to take her to jail because she refused to leave. And,
trespassing, essentially.
Yeah, and she, I don't know how much of it was because she couldn't move or just wouldn't move, but they had a long struggle trying to get her into the
and the officers on this recording, is worth saying, at least at times, make some sort of dismissive comments about her and her, whatever distress she says she's undergoing.
Yeah, it was there were some comments that were kind of eyebrow raising, but I mean not.
Well, they said she smelled bad and things like that.
Yeah, they were. But eventually, they got an officer to come with a cruiser because they couldn't get her into the van, which is elevated a little bit, so they were able to get her into the back of a police cruiser, and the officer was transporting her to the jail. He actually saw a car driving recklessly, made a traffic stop, and then came back to the car, and she was unresponsive. And he wound up taking her back to Fort Sanders, and where she was pronounced dead later.
Of a stroke.
Of a stroke, yes. Yep. She was, wasn't beaten. There was no, nothing like that. But she died of a stroke, and and hence the DA's decision not to bring any charges or anything like that. Now, they are still there were 4 KPD officers involved. There were several security officers from the hospital around too, but as far as KPD goes, there were 4 officers involved. They're on paid leave, and the one of the things that Belk is going to be doing is presumably is overseeing the internal investigation into it to see if they violated any policies and procedures in doing that. It was it's kind of hard to watch that video.
It is. It's very unpleasant. She's clearly in a lot of distress. She's also, you can kind of tell, is probably kind of a difficult person in a lot of ways, and of course when anybody's in distress, they can be very disagreeable. And obviously this raises questions not just about the police department, but about the judgments of the hospital as well. And clearly they were operating on, like, she had already been to another hospital, had been discharged. I think hospitals look for patient outcomes. It's one of the things they have to measure by law. And clearly discharging somebody, especially to the custody of the police, who then literally dies not long after leaving the property, is not a patient outcome that anybody is looking for. Now, I don't know how much the hospital, like obviously KPD is going to go through their own investigation. Presumably the hospital may as well. We may not hear a whole lot about that, not least because this seems like a case that could produce some litigation. And so I don't know that the hospital is going to have a whole lot to say about it under the circumstances. But certainly it's a case that raises a lot of questions. And it is another example of the ways that police get pulled into dealing with situations that don't seem like exactly law and order. I mean, yes, she was committing trespassing, apparently, but this was not a crime fighting scenario,
Yeah, and when I was watching this video, the things that run through your mind is, oh, yeah, you're right. Why are the police even there? Mm-hmm. Or if they're there, why not, instead of trying to take her to jail, take her to the BHUC, the alternative? But because she did seem psychologically out of sorts as well, and but then again, it still faced the same problem of whether they were going to try to take her to jail, take her to the BHUC unit, or take her to another hospital.
Right.
She still wouldn't get in the van. That was they couldn't.
Well, and she was insisting that she needed medical treatment, and after the fact, it's kind of hard to look at it and say that she didn't need medical treatment because, again, like, she literally died.
Yes.
Not long after leaving. So all of that is, a sad story in and of itself, and representative of probably the kinds of things that Brooklyn Belk will be looking at. And of course, as more comes out about that situation, we will continue to report on it. Turning to slightly lighter fare, I guess, out in the town of Farragut, West Knox County. They have a historic building there. It's kind of funny, when most of us think about Farragut, I think we think of it in terms of kind of new development, because there's been so much development there over the last 30 or 40 years. You look at pictures of that area from the 80s, and it's still mostly farmland. And now, of course, it's all subdivisions and commercial areas. Turkey Creek, of course, tremendously huge commercial development there. But there is right in the middle of it, right at the intersection of Campbell Station Road and Kingston Pike, and has been sitting at the intersection of Campbell Station Road and Kingston Pike, because both of those roads have been there the whole time this house has been there for the last 200 years.
Yep.
A house that the town of Farragut is calling the Campbell Station Inn. And that's a little bit of a term of... There
a little bit of creative license.
Yeah, well, so there was an original Campbell Station that was created by a guy named David Campbell, who lived in Farragut. He was a Revolutionary War hero, fought at the Battle of Kings Mountain, all of that, and then ended up in what we now know as Farragut, what was at the time just like a little country crossroads, and he was given a whole bunch of land there. They gave out land in those days,
yes,
especially if you'd been a Revolutionary War hero. Yeah. But they were just handing out land right and left to white settlers.
Yeah. Well, land that they had taken from the Cherokee and
exactly. But so anyway, Campbell ends up with this land. He did build a house there, but then because it was at this crossroads, even then in the early 1800s, it became a way station, an inn. And the original house was probably actually built in the late 1700s. It's all a little bit fuzzy where the original Campbell Station was, but those of you who have ever wondered why Campbell Station Road is named Campbell Station Road, that's why. There was a Campbell Station right there. Around 1820, the house that is there now was built, or at least the original part of it has probably been added on to over time. The records are very vague on this. But there is this old brick house that is about 200 years old, sitting right there in the middle of very developed central Farragut. And the town has owned it for the last 10 years. It was actually occupied, and I've seen this house, over the years, and I guess I sort of assumed it was already some kind of historic museum or something. I'd never gone inside it until I went to a meeting out there a couple of weeks ago. But it was actually continuously occupied by the same family from basically the Civil War until about 2012. Kind of amazing. And around 2012, that family, the Russell family, and the house is also known as the Avery Russell House, notified the town of Farragut that basically the last person in the family who lived there was, moving out. They were kind of ready to not be the stewards of this house anymore, and the town bought it. And so the town of Farragut has owned this house for the last 10 years and really hasn't done anything with it yet. They kind of knew they wanted to do something with it. They did invest some money in fixing it up, just kind of stabilizing the foundation. And they built a nice parking plaza around it. There's a nice outdoor accessible bathroom there and a little park area. So they've already kind of beautified the rest of the property. But now they're figuring out what to do with the house itself. And the house is just kind of empty right now. It's been stripped down mostly to... there's places where they've left wallpaper up, and it's almost kind of like a little living, like a museum of 20th century wallpaper, 19th century wallpaper. It goes, there's layers and layers. And then there's areas that are just exposed brick. And so they've had a working force to kind of talk about what to do with it, and they've proposed some ideas that they recommended just this past week to the Farragut Board of Aldermen, basically looking at some combination of probably having a little area for historic displays, maybe a little gift shop, have the downstairs probably available for sort of small event rentals, not like huge things. It's not actually that big.
Yeah, it's not a big house.
Yeah, especially when you go inside it, because it's kind of chopped up, and a lot of those walls are load bearing, so they're not things you can do a lot of changes to. And then maybe there is an upstairs as well. Maybe they would put some offices there because that is not ADA accessible, so you couldn't really have public spaces up there. And we'll see what Farragut includes in its budget for the coming year in terms of kind of taking the next steps. But it's just an interesting example of somewhat surprisingly, because of course we have lost so much historic property, both within the more urban areas, but also in our more rural areas. We've had some very old farmhouses be lost to just neglect over the years. So for those of us who are interested in history and historic preservation, it's just kind of an interesting project, and kind of enhanced by virtue of sitting right in the middle of all of this very modern suburban development on all sides.
Oh yeah, it's the house is 200 years old. That means that it's about 150 years older than just about every other building in Farragut.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So it's and it is interesting. I mean, I've seen that house my entire life, and had wondered about it, what the deal was with it. I found out that it was people referred to it. They've referred to it as Campbell Station Inn for.
And it was this house itself was definitely used as an inn, although not for very long. Probably from about like 1830 to up until around the Civil War. Really, from the Civil War onward, it was basically just a family farm residence.
And like the properties throughout the county where the old farmhouses were torn down or neglected. They subdivided the land and sold it off, and it's Village Green Shopping Center right there,
behind it. Yep.
So it is kind of incongruous there, where you see this old brick house, and behind it is a strip mall,
a shopping center. Yeah. Yep. Well, we will follow up on that and just kind of see what they eventually, which uses they decide to make of it, but. It will be open to the public once they get it. It needs to be, renovated. They need some more work done to it before it can really be safe and stabilized. But it will be open to the public. So anybody who's interested will eventually be able to go out and take a look. Okay, from very old construction to some prospective construction that hasn't happened yet. This pedestrian bridge across the Tennessee River, it came through both City Council and the UT Board of Trustees this week. What's going on?
There's a lot has happened about with the pedestrian bridge. One big thing that came out was the University of Tennessee and the City of Knoxville have entered into an agreement that they've got a memorandum of understanding about the bridge, and basically outlines how their partnership would move forward if the bridge is built. And we always have to put that in there, if the bridge is built, right, because it's not technically a done deal yet. But anyway, the university in fact, at the Board of Trustees meeting, approved buying a piece of property on the south waterfront for $9 million. It's where Valley Apparel has their plant there.
Old industrial property.
It's an old industrial property. They bought it. It's going to be the south anchor of the bridge. The northern anchor will be the space between Pratt Pavilion and Thompson Bowling Arena. The under this MOU, the university obviously will own the two anchor pieces of property. They'll provide easements to the city. It'll be the city's bridge. The city will own the bridge. They will maintain the bridge, and they're going to have easements from UT for the landing spots. So that got done. The city council voted to give the mayor the authority to apply for the $25 million federal grant that we've reported on. The deadline is the 28th, so they're getting ready to send that off. And if that comes through, then they still have a long ways to go as far as funding goes, because funding is guesstimated to be $70 million. We don't have a definitive number there, but they have asked, and so they got $25 million from the feds if they get it. There's also a $6 million, a little bit north of $6 million match that
for the federal grant.
For the federal grant, UT and the city are going to split that, and maybe others if they get other partners. They've talked to the county, for example. They kind of not counting on the county because the county's got its own infrastructure issues.
Sure.
But that $6 million match, the $25 million federal grant, and then they've asked the state for $55 million. And so we won't know. It's not in Governor Lee's budget, but there's always a supplemental budget request that comes toward the end of the legislative session. It could end up being there. They could not fund it. And if they don't fund it, they're not going to build it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
Obviously, if you don't have money, you can't build
yes. If you don't have both that $25 million from the feds and a significant contribution from the state, UT and the city by themselves are not going to spend $70 million on something.
They are not. They will definitely not. Mayor Kincannon was adamant about that last Tuesday at the council.
And that's kind of what happened the last time this project was seriously looked at. The city applied for another federal grant about 10 years ago, which it didn't get, and the project just kind of quieted down for the next 10 years.
And they had I think a grant before that too, where they did the environmental work and did some preliminary design work and stuff like that. And one of the things that came up in the city council meeting was, that work is still valid. They don't have to reinvent the wheel on that. They've already done it. And I don't know what the deadline would be, but if they don't build the bridge, the city's going to have to pay some of that money back. So that's and I don't recall off the top of my head the size of that one, but
now I think if you kind of read the tea leaves here, right, because the University of Tennessee is obviously, it is a state agency itself, and it is in close contact with the state and with the legislature. For them to be moving so confidently to go ahead and buy that piece of property. Now, like if the bridge doesn't get built, UT could still make some use of that property. They could put housing there if they want, but it just won't be nearly as convenient and beneficial to them as if the bridge is there.
Right.
And so, the fact that they are proceeding doesn't mean for sure that the state money is going to be there, but it looks like they think the state money is going to be there. That's kind of the vibe, I guess, they're giving off.
Yeah, it is. Especially, I mean, they put the bridge in the master plan, which they approved at their winter meetings, and and that's one thing. But they also entered into this memorandum of understanding with the city, and I think that
right, they created the legal structure.
Yeah, and that's kind of a step that you don't think that they would make without being fairly confident that it was going to be in the budget. And as we know, Randy Boyd, the president of the university, and Governor Bill Lee talk frequently, and not just their staffs.
Right.
They talk frequently. So to think that it looks like the stars are aligning for them to go ahead and build the bridge, but it's not a done deal.
And any sense of how long that might actually take, like when this bridge could be open?
They haven't really gone so far as to put in a timeline, but I imagine it would take a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so we don't know.
It's been a while since we've built any bridges. I guess the South Knoxville Bridge was the last one, and that was in the, I want to say 30 plus years ago.
Oh, yeah. And now this bridge is going to be a little different, at least conceptually. There are no pilings in the water. The span will go leap in one leap across the
which is
river.
probably easier because you're not carrying as much weight as if you're carrying cars and trucks, right?
Yeah, they don't have to engineer it to carry motor vehicles. So since that's not the case, it's going to be cheaper for one thing, and so if anything that costs $70 million could be considered cheap,
right?
But it is one of the other things that I've asked about, and people say it's too early to tell, is UT and ORNL do a lot of advanced materials work, and in fact the UT has a composite materials test bridge that they built that is in Morgan County. Not nearly as long as this would be, but it'd be interesting to see if they try to.
So we could get a 3D printed bridge, is what you're saying.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but
with the world's biggest 3D printer,
it would be pretty tough. But they could do some advanced materials, some with the deck of the bridge, for example.
Cool. All right. Well, certainly we will continue to track that, but it's looking at the moment, I guess, it's certainly looking more likely than it did a year ago.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Also, at the state level, we have talked in the past, including just on last week's episodes when we had representatives from Knox Pride on, about these bills criminalizing drag shows under certain conditions in certain places, and also prohibiting gender-affirming care for anyone under the age of 18. Both of those bills have now passed both the House and the Senate. They passed the House just this past week, basically on party line votes, and both of the Knox County Democratic representatives, Gloria Johnson and Sam McKenzie, voted against them, and our Republican delegates generally voted for them. And so now they go to Bill Lee, and he has not said for sure, but he's indicated pretty strong support of these. I think everybody expects he will sign them. The ACLU, among others, is basically promising litigation if and when the bills are passed. Of course, they put out a call, especially on the gender-affirming care bill, for anybody who expects to be impacted by it to contact them, because they're looking for plaintiffs basically to file suit against this. So who knows? The legal arguments there are going to be complex and interesting.
And one of the things is, now I don't know, like Vanderbilt, for example, does gender-affirming care for minors that go through the program. We talked about this. There aren't many.
Right. No, they've said they've had maybe 4 or 5 a year.
The actual medical care is, the surgeries things like that. Very rare.
Right. Although it does also prohibit even, hormone blockers.
Yes.
Those kinds of things. And more people receive those than the surgeries.
Many more. And so it will be interesting to see. I would imagine that they would not have much of a problem finding plaintiffs to bring that lawsuit.
Hey guys, I'm sorry to interrupt. That's just out of a question that I think applies here is, would mental health care be part of what is now becoming illegal as far as someone who is seeking gender affirming mental health care be covered in this as well, or is that going to be an outside thing?
Boy, that's a good question, and I don't know. I don't think the law is written in a way that specifies mental health care, but I don't know if it could be interpreted to include it.
Okay.
That's a good question, and I don't know enough to opine on it.
And mental health care is part of the regimen that you go through, in gender reassignment. So.
And another thing that this bill does that maybe hasn't gotten quite enough attention is it creates a retroactive cause of action for anybody who underwent gender transition or even just began gender transition when they were underage. They can sue their parents or guardians who consented to it, medical professionals who treated them, and they have 30 years after they turn 18 to do this.
Yeah.
So somebody like this could affect people who are already, who already had treatment, who want to come back and say that their parents shouldn't have let them, or their doctors shouldn't have let them. Like it's really creating a very hostile environment to anybody even thinking about providing any kind of support at all to any transgender person under the age of 18. And the Human Rights Campaign, which is a national LGBTQ advocacy group, of course, came out in opposition to these bills. And they said something that I thought was interesting, maybe not surprising to those of us who live here and follow these things. Tennessee has passed more anti-LGBTQ bills since 2015 than any other state in the country. We are number one in passing bills that now, of course, our legislators who are passing these say, no, they're not anti-LGBTQ. They're to protect children. They're to do this. They're to do that. But LGBTQ people and groups themselves feel like that's what these are. And by their metrics, Tennessee is the nation's leading generator of anti-gay and trans legislation. So we're number one. And we will, of course, continue to follow those issues as they develop further. Okay, we had a change here recently in the Knox County Republican Party leadership. February 18th, the party members got together and held their convention that they have every 2 years to elect party officers. We should say these party officer positions are volunteer, they're unpaid, they're typically not super glamorous jobs. A lot of it is just kind of political housekeeping work. Recruiting trying to recruit good candidates and trying to make sure the party has enough money to do the things it needs to do. They organize an annual fundraising dinner and so forth.
Poll workers and all that stuff.
Right, exactly. And the past two chairs were both somewhat unusual figures by party standards, because both of Randy Pace, who served for 2 years in 19 and 20, and then Daniel Herrera, who was the last 2 years, both relatively new to Knox County, both having moved here within, in Pace's case, I think maybe 6 years before he became party chair, in Herrera's case, even fewer. And they were also both very outspoken. They were, Randy Pace kind of rubbed some people in the party the wrong way in leading a very aggressive challenge to former state rep Eddie Manis's bona fides as a Republican. And then Herrera, of course, got the party behind a slate of explicitly Republican candidates in the nonpartisan city council races in 2021. which didn't work out well. They didn't win any of those. And so they took these for the speakers who they brought in, Herrera in particular, brought into the Lincoln Day dinner, which typically had been, sort of like a former governor or, maybe a Republican official from another state or something. But he brought in Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, who was very outspoken and divisive, let's say, conservative media figure. And then Representative Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, also on the fringe, I think you could say, of the National Republican Party. She certainly was during the whole fight over electing Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. She was one of the holdouts to the very end. And just kind of taking this very aggressive, I guess you could say Trump-era approach. So after 4 years of that kind of approach, under two kind of new figures and faces, the party went with somebody they were a little more familiar with and maybe comfortable with, and elected Buddy Burkhardt as chair. And he is a former chair. He served 2 terms right before Randy Pace, actually. Longtime employee of the sheriff's office, who's getting ready to retire this year. And I think a lot of people saw this as kind of the party. There'd been a lot of rancor about Herrera's leadership in particular. You had people like Steve Hunley at the Knoxville Focus, Victor Ashe, these kind of more establishment Republican figures being very critical of some of the decisions and the leadership. And so I think that most observers kind of saw Buddy Burkhardt as the candidate for people who had maybe had enough of that and kind of wanted to go back to something a little more low key.
Yeah, I think you're right. Kind of it's a Back to the Future thing. You go back and you get somebody who is known to everybody who's active in the Republican Party, respected by most, if not everyone, who is active in the Republican Party, whose style is not as confrontational, and he's just as much a Republican as Pace and Herrera, but he's got a very different style, very low key, as our listeners will get when we run the interview.
Yeah, and just before we get to that, we should just mention that he did have some competition in running for chair. Keith Lyon, who is former KPD officer, former head of the local Fraternal Order of Police, was also a candidate, and he had support from a lot of the same people who had supported Herrera and Pace. But this time around anyway, he didn't win. It was kind of close. It wasn't a blowout, but Burkhardt won fairly decisively. So yeah, with that set up, let's hear from Buddy Burkhardt. All right, joining us this week for the podcast interview, we have Buddy Burkhardt, who is the newly elected and also former chairman of the Knox County Republican Party. Buddy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for asking me.
So let's talk about this. You were elected, and it was competitive. There was another candidate in the ring to be new chair of the county GOP. Obviously, the current or former chair, Daniel Herrera, had said he wasn't going to seek another term, so it was open. You served, I believe, from 2015 to 19, right? As
I believe that is correct, yes.
And so what kind of prompted you to throw your hat and your name back in the ring for it after being away for a few years?
When Daniel had announced that he wasn't going to run again, I had already received, before that, I'd received some phone calls from different officials and other people in the party suggesting that I get back in this. I stayed on the fence until when I thought that Kyle Ward was going to get in. I thought maybe he would make a good chairman, good guy. But then Kyle decided he didn't want it. And so one Friday morning, 2 weeks before the election, I got a phone call and said, "Look, you got to do this." All right, I'm in. Y'all get me elected, I'll serve.
If
And
nominated, I will serve.
Yeah, and evidently that did not take long. My phone started going off, and everybody thanking me, congratulating me for getting in, offering support. It was great. It's a great feeling. Really is, and it was probably this has probably been one of the most humbling experiences of my life, where I have had people just being so kind to me and offering. It just humbled me, and I'm a very thankful individual for this. And but it's going to be a tough road this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You have been chair before, so obviously you know what it entails. But it's been, I guess, 4 years. So as you come back into the position, what do you see that's different now in kind of the landscape of Knox County, things that you're thinking about over the next 2 years that are maybe different from what you dealt with before as party chair?
I am a native Knoxvillian. I am from around here. And the people, I think they kind of react a little differently to me than, Randy. I don't know that he ever got a fair break. He was always considered a Yankee and was in here, and I don't think he got as fair a break as he possibly could have. Daniel had surrounded himself with some people that others just didn't like. I'm sorry. Yeah, and it caused a lot of division, where when I was chairman before, I would meet, I'd make a few phone calls, and I'd have a meeting with most of the elected officials. We'd talk about this or do that. Which direction, or how are you all feeling? Especially when elections came up. I would love to see that happen. And we used to have a precinct based, doggone, the word just left me, convention. Mm-hmm. Scott's laughing at me because I forget words.
No, I'm not laughing. No, I don't know. But you're right. It was a precinct-based system that you all had in place.
Yes, and those people were amazing. You had some that were very active and some that weren't. As you've heard me say before, my precinct chairman was Lee Johnson. Lee went to meetings. Lee was doing correspondence, and he kept his precinct in the loop. When I needed volunteers, or I needed people to show up, or there was some kind of impromptu event coming up, you call 4 or 5 precinct chairs and say, "Let your people know we need some people in this area to come to the expo center, or to be at Central High School, or wherever we might be having this event." And you get people show up, and I didn't have to make 500 phone calls and send out tons of emails. I called the key people, they responded, and I would love to see those precinct chairmen. I made the statement in the convention and during the time there that there's still some precinct books laying around, and I personally would like to just sit down and call as many of those people as I can, and find them as much as I can, and get them back on emails or regular mail. Just so that they can stay in the loop, and they can, I've been asked to bring back a precinct-based convention. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but it is obviously something that people have asked me to do. I feel like we had a lot more civility and dignity rather than a room full of people meandering around, I enjoyed that dignity. I enjoyed that kind of format that we would go through with roll calls, and we got the job done and went on about our business. So
you're talking about kind of rebuilding some party infrastructure, and also healing maybe some of the divisions that there have been in recent years. There's certainly been some Republicans criticizing other Republicans in prominent places around the community. But you're also facing a local Democratic Party that at least is talking a big game these days. They kind of looked at the results from last year and said, we're working to make Knox County blue. So I guess at that, at the level that the chairman has influence over these things, kind of what are your strategies for trying to stop that from happening?
Well, obviously we can put our efforts into when there is a district, since there's a couple of Democrats on county commission now, we can focus more efforts in those areas and make sure that, and again, rebuilding the precinct chairman and getting those back involved. And, and I know that it's been 4 years, though some of those people may or may not still be around, but maybe I can get a hold of part of their family and that who wants to continue that tradition of their of the involvement. And I would like to capitalize upon that and try to get, just rebuild our efforts. And I've already talked to a couple of people in the city to, they live in the city, they work in the city, they have city involvement, they're active in their community. What can they do to help me grow the Republican Party in the city and make sure that the Republicans know it's okay to be one? It's not a bad thing to be involved in politics. It is something that is very important for all of us to be involved, whatever your party you belong to. But obviously, I want you to be a Republican. I want you to come and help me.
One thing was 2 years ago, your predecessor made a big public push to back essentially Republican candidates for city council, even though city council is a nonpartisan race, and it wasn't very successful. And then now there's a proposal in the legislature to make all nonpartisan races partisan races, and which would again throw that open in city elections. So, what are your thoughts on that? And what I don't know if you're planning on doing something similar this year with getting Republican candidates to run for council, or just what are your thoughts on making these these currently nonpartisan races more partisan?
When it was a nonpartisan race, and I'm going to go back 4 years. I can't speak today. I'm just now I'm only up to about my ankles so far. I'm fixing to dive head first in the pool, but I'm only up to my ankles right now. I'm still trying to recover from everything. We have always we knew who the Republicans were that ran in city races. They've been involved with us. They've worked with us. We knew who they were. Obviously, they're more moderate than maybe a county Republican. But we can't go in there and just force Republican down the city's throat. We have to get people who want to. Jesse Mayshark is a good candidate. We think that he will make a good council member. Let's get Jesse involved, and let's make sure that Jesse gets the support from us that we can give him to the best of our ability. We've always done that, and we did that in the past. Obviously, there's a push from different people. I'm hoping that my charming personality will help people to move forward in a more direct manner to work with each other versus everybody flying off. There's been there's been several new clubs started that don't identify as Republican, but they identify as right to life, things like that because they didn't think they got the support from our party that they needed. I would like to at least let them know that I want to keep those lines of communication open to them And then that in turn will expand the base from which we're going to work, which will help us in the city and county elections, and ultimately in our state and federal elections. We want to keep the good people rolling. And, obviously I'm prejudiced toward my beliefs, but as I told somebody today, just because you and I don't agree on one topic does not make us an enemy. It makes us disagree on a topic. We can still work on other things that we agree on. We don't have to argue about those things. I mean, would I really change your mind about something you believed in very strongly? Maybe, but I'm not going to do it with an argument and a fight. I'm going to do it with common sense and kindness.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I've got.
Sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
Jesse has my vote. No,
if nominated, I will not run. I'm going to turn this down.
But no, Buddy, one of the things, and you kind of alluded this a little bit, was, especially in county government, and especially outside of the city limits. Your party has, is strong and dominant even, and so one of the things one of the impressions I get is that because in some of these areas there isn't as strong of a Democratic opponent or opposition, that Republicans have turned on each other a little bit. And you mentioned those the one issue that I don't want to argue about, but it seems like Republicans are picking one or two issues and going at each other about those issues rather than anything else, because the seats are safe. Is that something that you see, or is that a perception that we have from the outside?
I think that your perception is close. There is, like I said, there's become, because things didn't go my way, I'm not going to play with you at the playground anymore. And I want everybody to know that the playground is open for all of us. Just because you disagree on how to go down the slide doesn't mean we couldn't work on the teeter-totter. My analogies are sometimes a little backwards, but they make sense to me. I want us all to be under the big tent. And here again, when I was chairman before, there were people that did not agree with some of the things I did. Some people actually got mad at me. That's okay. You're entitled to be mad at me. Just don't stay mad at me, because we've still got other things to do. And just because we didn't get along on one thing doesn't mean there's not 10 other things that we can work together on. And we can work, being Republicans keeps us basically in a path. And just because you forked off a little bit doesn't mean that you can't get back on the path and work on some other stuff with me. And I encourage that. I don't, I've got pretty thick skin. I know some people tend to take umbrage of things that are written or said. I look at that and say, if your skin is that thin, you have chosen the wrong playground to play on, because people say things. It's okay. You're entitled to say this any way you want to, but are you going to hurt my feelings? Nah. Will I still talk to you in the future? Probably. But, I may have to choose my words a little more carefully.
Well, and so, it would be the easy way to see your kind of return to this position would be that, the party had two really newcomers in a row, people who were kind of newcomers to Knox County and to the Knox County Republican Party, who were pretty vocal, forceful in a lot of ways, but also did produce some backlash even within the party. And so what the party's done is go kind of back to a familiar, safe safe place. Like, is that what you think happened, or is it something different than that?
I think they know what they get with me. They know that I'm not going to. You can't disrespect the people that built this party and grew it to what it is and expect the party to continue to grow. You've got to be able to work with everyone. And here again, I don't want to go about, what may or may not have been said or done. I know what I need to do, and I need to go and talk to all the people that have expressed their kind words and well wishes and encouraged me to run. And I need to spread that to, one club president referred to me when I was chairman as the voice and face of the Republican Party. I was at every meeting. I was around for everybody to talk to, and they didn't get double speak. They got either an answer or send me a text or an email and let me see what's going on. Let me figure this out. I don't have an answer, but I will get back to them. I want to be able, I want that civility back. And I used the word a few minutes ago, dignity. I want the dignity of the party. We don't need to look silly in front of the world. Well, I think that's people take offense because I want to bring back the old guard. I want to bring back the precinct people. I want to make sure that the people who built this party, who have been ignored and not given proper respect in the last little bit, I want those people to come back. I want those people to help me. I couldn't have done what I did the last time I was chairman if it hadn't have been for those people coming up and going, I got this. Let me take care of this for you. Well, thank you very much. And again, I was humbled and I never want to take for granted what was done for me to elect me chairman. There were a lot of people came out just specifically to vote for me. As you said earlier, it wasn't a blowout. It was a competition. It was a true competition. I'm glad that I won. I'm glad that I can, that we can now go forward and all those things that were, I want to make the world a better, safer place. How about that?
Very, very diplomatic way to put it. Well, and I guess we should mention you're a longtime employee of the Knox County Sheriff's Office for 29 years, and you're getting ready to retire this year, I think. Is that going to give you, I guess, more time to focus directly on the party over the next couple of years?
Yes, I will have, a fair amount of free time. I do want to go fishing. Mm-hmm. I want to go on the weekdays when there's not so many people on the water. I want to kind of relax. I told somebody I probably got about 6 months worth of hobbies and things that I need to finish and complete at my house. I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities to help me occupy my time. Not real jobs, just things that people, part-time jobs and things that I could do to help occupy time. But I don't think I'm going to have that problem right now. I think this job, at least on the front end, is going to be a very time consuming, and it's going to require a fair amount of my efforts to make sure that everybody is. I've got a lot of phone calls to make.
Sure.
I've got a lot of people that I want to ensure that I don't play a lot of the silly games. I mean, I'm what you see is what you get. And if I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry. But at the same time, it's better that I tell you the truth and what I think than you to walk away with a totally different opinion of what, you say black, I say, well, yeah, it's kind of, but it's really going to be kind of gray, when in fact it is black and white. And I need to tell people it's not to hurt your feelings. I mean, I'm sorry if I do, but at the same time, we're dealing with two things that we don't agree on, but there's still many other things that we can work on. That does not make you not my friend. I tell one of my cohorts in this, he and I have argued. I'm just going to tell you, he and I have fought. We've had just flat out arguments. But then we turn right around and let's go to lunch and we'll talk about something else for a while. That's it. We agreed to disagree. I'm not going to change his mind. He's not going to change mine. He offers me suggestions. I take them or I don't. But I tell him, I don't think I can do that right now. I don't think that's appropriate for me to do. Let's go on to the next topic.
Right. All right. Well, that's probably a good way to wrap it up here. But I'm sure we'll be talking to you a lot over the next couple of years as we all see what transpires on the local political landscape. So thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for asking me, and I do look forward. I was blessed last time with a very kind media presence. I hope to continue that. I mean, you guys got a job to do just like I do. I respect that. You do. I wouldn't do your job, and you probably wouldn't want mine.
That is a fair assumption. Well, we appreciate people who return our phone calls. So
well, you have my phone number. You have my email. Both are public, and I do answer the phone. And if it's a bad time, I'm going to tell you this is a bad time. Can you call me back later on? And then we'll continue on hopefully a civil and wonderful relationship over the next 2 years.
Sure thing. Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks again to Buddy for talking with us, and I'm sure we will continue to talk with him as local elections roll around and so forth.
Absolutely. That's might not talk to him so much this year with the city election, but certainly next year. I
did think it was interesting what he said about the city elections, that kind of saying that, it sounded to me like, no, there's not going to be a Republican Party slate. But he also made the point that, Republican donors have always been involved in city races. And as he said, most people usually know who the Republicans are or the more conservative candidates are or so forth. So it's not that there's no level of involvement, but it didn't sound like he's contemplating there were
formal...
there were party mailers that went out 2 years ago, and it kind of sounds like we're not likely to see that this year. Okay, so now we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast, where every week we ask our readers through our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, one of the many benefits of being a Compass subscriber, and you can find out all about that at CompassKnox.com. But we go on our Facebook group and ask if there's anything in particular people would like to hear about on the podcast. We got a question this week about the University of Tennessee master plan, which you just mentioned, and we talked about that in last week's episode 2, and they approved it this past week. But the question is, what are the impacts or potential impacts of that master plan on the city of Knoxville? Because basically it's identifying a whole area surrounding the campus where UT now will have the legal ability to expand to if they want to, and all of that property is in the city of Knoxville.
Yes, it is. It's a 1.5 mile radius circle around the campus. And it includes the south waterfront. It includes most of downtown. It includes all of Fort Sanders, much of Mechanicsville, and goes as far west as the edge of Sequoia Hills. So, it goes to Cherokee Boulevard essentially. So anyway, that's the boundary in which they can expand. They still have to jump through some hoops, but they can go ahead and don't need anybody's permission from the state or the board of trustees to negotiate with property owner if they want to buy something. So how that actually impacts the city of Knoxville, it kind of depends on how they decide to expand. We already know, of course, they bought the property in South Knoxville for the end of the bridge. Of course, if they don't build the bridge, they've got property there. They can probably put housing on it. They might buy other property over there. They could. They have talked to the city about properties downtown for various things. I mean, they've already got the conference center there, and so they may expand their footprint downtown as well. I don't think that they'll do a whole lot in Fort Sanders. They could though, if they wanted to.
Right. They've kind of said, although it's not necessarily a legally binding commitment, that they're not going to look to acquire or tear down historic properties, which has been a real flashpoint there over the years.
Absolutely, but they could, for example, buy some of the apartment buildings. If they wanted to, they could buy those and use them for student housing if they wanted.
Right, and as a state entity, as we're saying that essentially, now they have to pay a determined fair market rate for it, but they can take anything they want. You can't, if you have property within that radius and they come to you and say, we want your property, you actually can't tell them no.
Well, you can tell them no, but they're going to take it anyway.
Right.
You might as well go ahead and negotiate because they're going to take it. And yes, they do have the power of eminent domain. So they can take whatever property if it comes to that. It all depends on how vital the property is to their expansion plans. And I think for now, obviously, there's nothing. There are no projects that are in the master plan that they pass. The master plan is a 10-year roadmap of improvements that they're going to make to the campus, and there are no projects outside of the current property, including the one they just bought, or they're buying. They haven't bought it. They
got approval to buy it.
They got approval to buy it, but outside of those footprints, there's nothing in the master plan that would indicate where they're going to go and what they're going to do. As a practical matter, most of what they would do would probably be real close to campus. I don't think that, although they have a building over in Mechanicsville, I don't think that they would put a lot of stuff over there just because they want the campus to be compact.
Right.
So,
well, and the other things to mention as far as local impact, I think, are, first of all, any property they buy, especially if it's currently privately owned, comes off the tax rolls because UT does not pay property taxes. And they are also not subject to local zoning laws. And so whatever zoning protections a property has down there basically goes away if the university buys it.
Yeah, and in one of the provisions of the memorandum of understanding that they entered into with the city was anything that they do on the South Waterfront, they are essentially saying will comply with the South Waterfront.
They're voluntarily going to comply with the code.
Form-based code, and that's a different code than other parts of the city.
Right.
Right.
Legally, they don't have to. They don't have to. But they're saying they will.
But they're saying that they will, and if they have something that would not would not be in compliance with that code, that they would consult with the mayor to try to see what they can do. But the intent is to follow the form-based code. Now, we said they're not legally bound to. Right. They can do whatever they want. They're UT. They can do whatever they want.
Well, and it seems to me from the outside that the city and the university these days have a pretty cordial relationship. I think a better relationship than was the case maybe 20 or 30 years ago. The campus leadership is more engaged with the community, I think, maybe than it used to be. Obviously, having a president in Randy Boyd, who is himself also very heavily invested as a private businessman and property owner in the city and in downtown. Obviously, the baseball stadium is a big cooperative project between the city and Boyd, even though UT has no part of that. Right. But for the moment, it seems like they're all getting along pretty well. Of course, you don't know what might happen in the future, and if you got some other leadership at UT that had its own ideas about what they wanted to do with some things downtown or whatever, having that defined growth area now would give them the ability to do that. For a long time it was kind of like UT and the city ignored each other. They pretended the other didn't exist. Right.
But you're right. At least the current administration in the city and the current leadership at campus, they talk all the time. They are obviously working together on the bridge project. There will probably be others coming down the road as well. So it's a new, for somebody, if you'd left Knoxville 30 years ago and come back today, you'd be shocked that there's that much cooperation.
Right. Yeah.
So another question I got for you guys. I'm sorry. In the hierarchy of things, if university wanted a piece of property that the city owned, does their authority as a state entity supersede the city's?
I believe so, but I'd want to get another legal opinion on that.
I think so too, but like I said, I don't want to give a definitive answer on that one.
Where they would definitely run into trouble is if they tried to do anything with TVA property, because TVA and the railroads probably trump basically everybody else in town in terms of their property rights.
Yeah, it was one of the things that came up in talking about the council and talking about the South Waterfront was there's a railroad overpass over West Blunt Avenue, close to Chapman Highway. It's a one-lane. It was built back when one lane was sufficient, and it's very narrow. Obviously there are concerns about traffic going through there, and and somebody mentioned the railroad overpass needed to be widened. And I'm sitting there going, good luck with that.
Yeah.
This is you're dealing with the railroads, man. They've got more power than just about anybody.
Yeah.
So speaking of eminent domain, if a railroad wants your property, they can get it.
Yeah.
Private railroads have the power of eminent domain.
It'll be way easier to build that pedestrian bridge than it will be to force a railroad to widen something that the railroad doesn't want to widen.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking ahead to next week, we actually don't have any major public meetings on the agenda because this is kind of one of these funny weeks where it's the end of one month, beginning of another month, and so there's just nothing that falls there. There are a couple of interesting things that we know of coming up next week, which we will be writing about, and we will come back here to talk about. Anything else you want to add, Scott?
No, I think that that all we can do is tease next week at this point. So with what we know for sure is going to be happening, but
things that we don't know.
But the unknown unknowns.
That's right.
Always make themselves apparent at some point.
We hope so. Anyway, that's a lot of the news business is sitting around waiting for those unknown unknowns to happen.
Yeah, but the great thing about the news business is, even if you're sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, I don't have a story for tomorrow," you will.
Yeah.
You can find one by the end of the day. That's not. It'll happen. We just can't predict what they're going to be yet.
That's part of what makes it fun. And whatever happens, we will be back here next week to talk about it. Thanks, as always, to Seth Barber for his production here with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will see you all in March.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.